What did you observe in Paris?
Objection? Hearsay.
Sustained. Is there any reason behind Polonius worried for Laertes?
Polonius did say that Laertes had a liking for gambling, fencing, swearing, drinking, and equality. Laertes did tend to act a bit hostile when he was agitated. And for that reason, I feel that Polonius feared that his son would get himself in trouble in Paris.
Okay, thank you.
Would the defense like to cross-examine?
Were the sources you received information from under the influence of alcohol?
Considering that Laertes participated in such activities that Polonius mentioned, his peers probably are not all that credible.
Did you personally see and speak to Laertes?
Nope.
Is it typical that Laertes would act violently?
No, I have never seen him act violently.
Thank you. No further questions.
Does the prosecution have any further witnesses?
No.
Alright, would the defense like to pull over the first witness?
Yes. I call Laertes to the stand. Could you please describe the details of the fencing match?
Yes, Hamlet agreed to fence with me under invitation by the king, so we began to play once the audience settled down, and Hamlet hit me first, and then he tauntingly continued. And then, so I gave him the second hit, but when he approached me further, I looked to the king with fearful eyes and told him that I would hit Hamlet, even just once, to get him to back off. Hamlet did taunt me further as he barreled towards me, so I hit him, accidentally wounding him, forgetting that the sword was pointed and poisoned.
Has Hamlet ever threatened you before?
Yes, he did when the king, the queen, and I went to Ophelia's grave.
Could you please describe the events at Ophelia's grave?
We stood mourning my dear Ophelia's death, and Hamlet jumped out from the shadows and approached me. He scolded me for mourning Ophelia, and we started wrestling. And then he said that he loved Ophelia more than I ever could. So he started lying about all the things he would do for Ophelia that I could not. He even stated that he would eat a crocodile for Ophelia. After a few words from the queen, Hamlet walked off with the ratio.
Was the murder premeditated?
Yes.
And was this your original idea?
It was not my idea. It was a plan for Hamlet only, and Claudius pushed me to do it.
Thank you. No further questions.
Would the prosecution like to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor. So why did you return from Paris?
I heard of my father's death, so I came to carry out justice on the felon that murdered my father.
What happened when you returned to Elsinore?
When I returned, I demanded to know where my father was, and I refused to believe that he actually died. And in my irrational rage, I believed that the king was guilty of killing my father. Many villagers who were also curious as to the mysterious murder of my father stood outside the Elsinore's doors, and they were saying that I should be king.
Did you wish to seek revenge for your father's murder?
Most definitely.
Thank you. Have no further questions?
Thank you, prosecution. Does the defense have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to call Horatio to the stand. So, how has Hamlet described his feelings towards Laertes?
Well, when in the graveyard, Hamlet made it quite clear that he did not believe any of Laertes' words in his lamenting of Ophelia.
And could you please explain the last conversation between Hamlet and Laertes?
Hamlet apologized for acting rashly and killing Laertes' father. Seeing that Hamlet was somewhat sincere in his apology, Laertes accepted his apology, but did not intend to forget about his father's death.
And what was Hamlet's last words and wishes?
Hamlet instructed me to live on and tell his tale of tragic sorrow. In his last words, he gave over the kingdom to young Fortinbras of Norway.
Thank you. No further questions.
Would the prosecution like to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor. Was there any type of confrontation between Laertes and Hamlet before the duel?
Yes. Yes, in the graveyard at Ophelia's funeral. Hamlet irrationally approached Laertes while Laertes was mourning the death of his beautiful young sister. Both men then proceeded to brawl. Hamlet, due to his love for Ophelia and his grief over her death, and Laertes because he blamed Hamlet for the insanity of his sister.
As a living witness of the duel between Laertes and Hamlet, can you please describe what you saw?
Hamlet struck Laertes twice, and so proceeded to prance on merrily, enjoying the thrill of the fight as his nature would have it. Then Laertes stabbed Hamlet, and then he dropped his rapier. In a scuffle of weapon stabbing, Hamlet grabbed Laertes' weapon, and then in turn stabbed Laertes. In response, Laertes tells Hamlet that they are both done for, and blames it all on the king.
Thank you. No further questions.
You may go. Does the defense have any further witnesses?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Are you ready with your final arguments?
Yes, Your Honor. It's plain. I thought we had to go.
Go ahead, prosecution.
It's plain to see that Laertes had a motive for murder of Hamlet and accepted help from the king only to make the murder easier on himself. In no way, shape, or form did Claudius manipulate Laertes into murdering Hamlet. Laertes returned to Elsinore to seek revenge for his father's death, first confronting Claudius about the murder before finding out the true story. Laertes is a young man who overreacts before knowing what truly happened. He may say he was manipulated, but why should we trust him when even his own father couldn't trust him? Polonius sent his servant to France to spy on Laertes to see if he was dishonoring the family, and the evidence was striking. If his family can't even trust him, how can we? Laertes is used to having someone to blame things on and not accepting blame, which is exactly what occurs now. He is not accepting blame and trying to have Claudius take the blame for him. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you need to ask yourself now is, do you want someone who is so revenge-driven that he would commit murder out on the streets with the possibility to harm you or your family? No, of course not. Now make the smart decision and find Laertes guilty.
All right, would the defense like to give their closing statement?
Yes, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for your time and patience. The prosecutor has explained that my client was identified as a murderer, but as evidence shows, Laertes acted in self-defense. My reliable witnesses explained what really occurred at the fencing match and proved that Prince Hamlet and Laertes resolved their differences, which negates motive. The prosecutor has explained that my client is behind the death of Prince Hamlet. Hamlet did hit Laertes twice, and each time with more malice, taunting and jeering at him. Hamlet's insanity made Laertes feel threatened. According to my reliable witnesses, Laertes, the murder was premeditated and it was not his original idea. Clearly, he was under the influence of the king's orders. Laertes felt frightened that Hamlet would harm him right after the fight at Ophelia's grave. Hamlet was not in a good state of mind, and Laertes knew his actions would be violent and unpredictable. Laertes would not have wanted to kill Hamlet anyways because before Hamlet died, they exchanged words of forgiveness. My client would not forgive Hamlet just to murder him. So we ask you to please consider all the evidence and return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, defense. Any final remarks?
There you
May the prosecution and defense now exit for jury deliberation, please? Okay, so in reviewing this case, the prosecution's opening statement stated that it was a friendly duel between Laertes and Hamlet that ended in the death of Hamlet. Hamlet was driven by insanity. Laertes just wanted revenge, and Laertes used a poisoned sword to murder Hamlet, and Laertes knew what he was doing. In the defense's opening statement, it was stated that Prince Hamlet and Laertes resolved their conflict previously to the fight. It was a chaotic night, and everyone was just going in for the grabs, and Prince Hamlet made the first hit, and Laertes reacted in self-defense. When the prosecution called up its witnesses, Claudius stated that Hamlet and Laertes dueled. Laertes wanted revenge on Hamlet for killing. Laertes pre-planned not to use a blunted sword, and it was poisoned, and had a backup plan of using a poisoned cup in case the sword didn't work. And after being stabbed, Gertrude dropped dead because of Laertes' poisoned cup. For Reynaldo, Laertes acted hostile when agitated, which he found out when he went to Paris. For the defense's witnesses, Laertes stated that Claudius invited both Hamlet and Laertes to the match. Hamlet did attack Laertes before the match, previous to that, when at the grave, and Claudius pushed Laertes to kill Hamlet. And as for Horatio, Hamlet thought that Laertes was a liar. Hamlet did apologize for killing Polonius previous to the fight, and Hamlet gave the kingdom over to Fortinbras and asked Horatio to stay and tell the story. So, for the quality of the prosecution's cross-examination, the questions demanded Laertes to prove that he sought revenge on his father's death. And when questioning Horatio, Horatio made it seem like both Hamlet and Laertes were out for revenge. And quality of defense's cross-examination, the questions proved her point, and the questioned the state of insanity, or state of self-defense, sorry. And for the prosecution's closing statement, the motive for murder, there was a motive for murder, and Laertes accepted help from the king, so it was still Laertes' fault. Laertes wasn't even trusted by his own father, and he was revenge-driven, so he should be guilty. And the defense's closing statement, Laertes acted in self-defense, Hamlet's insanity threatened Laertes, and Laertes was under the influence of the king's orders. So, that is all. So, what do we vote on, guys? Not guilty, raise your hand. You guys can just the jury. So, not guilty? Anyone? Okay, and then guilty. That's a tie. Mr. Smead, do you want to be the tiebreaker?
Yeah.
Not guilty or guilty?
Guilty!
No.
Yeah.
Yay!